Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order, the reorganization meeting of the West Windsor-Plainsboro Regional School District Board of Ed. Okay, I have to read the Sunshine Law. In accordance with the state Sunshine Law, adequate notice of this meeting was provided by sending a notice of the time, date, and location to the extent known. The agenda of the meeting on January 10th, 2019, a year ago, and January 3, 2020, to the Princeton Packet and the Times. Copies of the notice have also been placed in the board office and in each of the district schools on January 25th, 2019, a year ago, January 3, 2020, sent to Plainsboro and West Windsor Public Libraries and Plainsboro and West Windsor Township Clerks on January 25th, a year ago, and January 3, 2020. So, we're convening the reorganization meeting, and it's the same public notice that I just read. Same location, same dates. So results of the November 5th election were, in West Windsor, we had Ms. Ho with 2,993 votes. We had, should I say Ms. or Ms.? We have Ms. McCune, 2,825 votes. And then we had Ms. Hertz at 2,758 votes. Personal choice was 34. In Plainsboro, we had Ms. Zovich, 1,153 votes, and we had Mr. Zhang at 799 votes. Okay. So at this time, we're going to have the administration of the oath of office. I'm going to ask that you read the oath in front of you, and we'll start with Mrs. Zovich, or Ms. Zovich.
Okay. I, Robin Zovich, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same and to the governments established in the United States and this state under the authority of the people, so help me God. I, Robin Zovich, do solemnly swear that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education, and that I am not disqualified as a voter pursuant to RS 19-4-1, nor disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in the NJS 18A 12-1, and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
Okay, thank you. And congratulations. Okay, next we have Ms. Ho.
Okay, this will be boring now. I, Louisa Ho, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same and to the government established in the United States and the state under the authority of the people. I, Louisa Ho, do solemnly swear that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education, and that I am not disqualified as a voter pursuant to RS 19-4-1, nor disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in NJS 18A 12-1, and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability.
Okay, thank you and congratulations. And next we have Ms. McCune.
I, Graylin McCune, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same and to the governments established in the United States and this state under the authority of the people, so help me God. I, Graylin McCune, do solemnly swear that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education, and that I am not disqualified as a voter pursuant to RS 19-4-1, nor disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in NJS 18A 12-1, and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
Thank you and congratulations. Okay, at this time we're going to have election for president. What I'm going to do is the process will be, I'll open the floor for nomination. Once we get a nomination, however it works, then I'll close the floor for nominations. Then I'll ask you to fill out the white slip with the with the candidate you're in favor of, fold the slip up and then pass them over to me. Fold them up so everyone can't read them, I guess. Very sophisticated here. So with this moment, I'd like to open the floor to nomination of President of the Board of Education.
I'd like to nominate Michelle Case.
Okay. Hearing no other names, close the floor at this time. Ask you to vote, sign the sheet, write the name on the sheet that you're in favor of, crinkle it up, and pass it to me. Throwing them around. Okay, we'll start with Ms. Krug, voted for Ms. Case. Mr. Flores voted for Ms. Case. Ms. Case voted for Ms. Case. Mr. Chang voted for Ms. Case. Ms. McCune voted for Ms. Case. Ms. Juliana voted for Ms. Case. Ms. Zovich voted for Ms. Case. Mr. Whitfield voted for Ms. Case. Ms. Ho voted for Ms. Case. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank my board colleagues for entrusting me with the honor of being the board president again this year. With that, I'd like to ask for nominations, please, for vice president.
I would like to nominate Rachel Juliana.
Okay, I think that closes the nominations. So everybody needs to please vote on the blue paper.
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Chang, voted for Ms. Juliana. I had Ms. Case on the brain, almost said Ms. Case. Mr. Flores voted for Ms. Juliana. Ms. McCune voted for Ms. Juliana. Ms. Juliana voted for Ms. Juliana. Ms. Zorich voted for Ms. Juliana. Mr. Whitfield voted for Ms. Juliana. Ms. Ho voted for Ms. Juliana. Ms. Case voted for Ms. Juliana. Ms. Krug voted for Ms. Juliana. Okay, congratulations.
So after we swear in our new members and elect our president and vice president, the other order of business that we have at our reorganization meeting is we have a series of votes to basically adopt what we've been doing since the beginning of this school year and let the district continue its business. And so for that, I need a motion on Roman numeral 7 through 33. Tony and Dana. Are there any questions or comments?
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Chang. Yes. Mr. Flores.
Yes.
Ms. Ho. Yes. Ms. Krug.
Yes.
Ms. McCune.
Yes.
Mr. Whitfield.
Yes.
Ms. Zovich.
Yes.
Ms. Juliana.
Yes.
Ms. Case.
Yes.
Okay. Passed.
So that closes our reorganization, and now we can move forward with our regular meeting. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to our superintendent.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the start of 2020. I wanted to just congratulate and welcome Robin and Graylin to the board, and welcome back Louisa as re-election. Also, just wanted to note that this month is January's school board member recognition month in New Jersey. And there's a resolution on the agenda, I believe it's item 4, under administration, to recognize School Board Appreciation Month. But I just wanted to send a thanks and acknowledgement on behalf of the community, the staff, the students, and the administration, to the members of the Board of Education for our gratitude and your dedication and service to this community, to this school district, for your guidance and your leadership and helping us set forward a direction for the students of this community. So thank you to all of you for your dedication and your work.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over for our student representative report.
Hello. Okay. Hi. I'm Annabelle Sue. I'm a high school South senior. So first, Happy New Year. I'm going to start out with a little bit of sports updates. So the girls swim team finished in first place at the Pirate Invitational Swim Meet. The boys swim team also finished, but in second place at the Pirate Invitational Swim Meet. And then the boys basketball team is off to a 4-2 start, while the girls basketball team is off to a 3-2 start. Thursday night on January 9th at 7 p.m. the New Theater is the Junior College Planning Night for parents of juniors at High School South. Next week we will also have our Spirit Week, with Friday ending the week with winter sports pep rally. And China Night this year will be at High School South on February 7th. Finally, the Grover Middle School and High School South Band Festival will be held on January 24th at 7 p.m. in the New Theater at High School South. Thank you.
Thank you. Annually, our board is required to have an ethics training, and so we're going to have that tonight. And so I will turn it over to our board attorney to tell us what we need to know about our ethics.
And I'd like to say, after the presentation, I'm going to pass, there'll be coffee and milk. No. I'd like to pass this signed sheet down, and every board member can sign it for me, please, because I have to turn this in to the state. Thank you.
For those of the new board members who don't know me, my name's Jeff Kachese. As I told Ms. McCune, you'll see me and Mark Toscano here at meetings for the most part. Today you're lucky enough to get your board ethics training. You know, I know you hear that and you want to run away. It goes down like bad medicine, but it is important. It's stuff that you have to know, because, again, for the new members, there are ethical obligations, and if you don't meet those obligations, charges can be filed against you with the School Ethics Commission. And just so we're clear, this training does not replace the training required by law for newly elected and appointed members. There we go. Okay. But just a kind of a brief overview so you understand, the School Ethics Commission is the body charged with enforcing the Ethics Act. And with that, there are a number of different penalties if you violate the School Ethics Act, ranging from reprimand to removal. There's also suspension and censure. But hopefully, when you listen to this, you won't accidentally violate the ethics law. What I'm going to do is, we have a lot of slides here, so I'm going to hit the highlights. I'm going to go through the laws with you and then hit the highlights of some cases so you kind of so it gives some flavor to the laws. Just generally speaking, can I hear me? Okay, is that better? Generally speaking, so you understand, the board is the governing body for the school district. You're charged with high-level policy-making decisions. You're the only entity that can enter into contracts or binding agreements. So I do a lot of labor employment law, so an example is a collective negotiation agreement. The board is the entity that signs that approves it, adopts it, and signs it. Settlement agreements, things of that nature. Your decision-making authority as a board is limited. You cannot administer the schools. That's part of the ethical code. You may not act in many situations without CSA recommendations. You'll see CSA, for those of you who don't know, CSA throughout this presentation. That's the superintendent, the chief school administrator, superintendent. For example, hiring decisions. You need a superintendent recommendation before there can be a hiring decision. We're going to cover the School Ethics Act, which is NJSA 18A:12-24.1. All right. 24.1A is uphold all laws. And I'm going to read these because you actually have to know the law itself. So I'll read the laws to you and then just, like I said, hit the highlights. I will uphold and enforce all laws, rules, and regulations of the State Board of Education and court orders pertaining to schools. Desired changes should be brought about only through legal and ethical procedures. You'll see there's evidence of violations. You have that in your packet. You can go through that. A couple of examples. Board member violated the code when he attempted to issue a board employee a rice notice. For those of you who don't know, a rice notice is a notice that employees need to be given if we're going to speak about it in an executive session. You will learn about that if you don't know about it already. But the board cannot issue a rice notice, a board member individually cannot issue a rice notice on their own. If you do, that's an ethical violation because you're not following the law. In the next case, the president of the board violated the code when he took it upon himself to contact someone hired by the board to tell them that their appointment was void because he directed the superintendent to remove, sorry, is that better? Oh. To remove the individual's name from the agenda, but the superintendent failed to do so. This board member was ultimately removed. So, in this case, the board member, the superintendent had not removed the name, the board had voted on the individual. The board member then called the individual. And obviously that's going above and beyond. You're administering the school for one thing. For another thing, you're not following the law. So, under subsection B, moving on to the next one, I will make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of children and will seek to develop and maintain public schools that meet the individual's needs of all children regardless of their ability, race, creed, sex, or social standing. I go a little bit beyond that because the law against discrimination has a whole series of protected categories that would fall into this, and all of those would apply here. An example, and just so you know, when you see these case numbers, C18-10, that is a commissioner's decision. So that's an actual case that happened. When you see an A, that's an advisory opinion. You can ask for advisory opinions in certain situations so you don't commit ethical violations. C18-10, the board member violated the code when he released an ethics complaint filed against another board member to the media which contained confidential information regarding the other board member's student child. In this situation, the other board member was off the board at that point, but it doesn't matter. It was still the student's confidential information. Back here. Section C, I will confine my board action to policy making, planning, and appraisal, and I want to help to frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted those who will be affected by them. As we said earlier, your role is policy making. That is your major function here. So you got to confine yourself to that, and it overlaps with not administering the schools, excuse me. C1614, the board member conducted a site visit to assess a candidate for assistant superintendent without board authority. That's a big no-no, obviously. When it comes to personnel decisions, and they'll be discussed in executive session by the superintendent and administration. The board does not get involved in personnel other than based on the recommendation of the superintendent. You do not, I mean, really, the SEC frowns upon board members being on personnel committees, but they do allow it, and they really frown upon board members being involved in the interview process. That is a recipe for an ethics violation. C-3214, board member violated the ethics code when she participated in a discussion to develop criteria for use by a consulting firm in search for the district's next superintendent when her daughter is an employee of the same district in which she sits as a board member. We will talk about conflicts quickly later, and conflicts will limit what you can participate in, what you may need to recuse yourself from. If you have questions about conflicts, please talk to administration, talk to us, so we can determine what you can and can't participate in or vote on. Subsection D, I will carry out my responsibility not to administer the schools, but together with my fellow board members to see that they are well run. This is the big one. This is what oftentimes causes problems for board members. It's a lot of times board members don't realize their function is just that policy-making function for the most part. And you'll see board members who go and visit schools without authority of administration. The same rules apply to board members as applies to every other citizen about entering a school. Unless you have permission, you have to follow the board policy in terms of going to schools, things of that nature. And speaking with staff, this is, subsection D is one of the subsections that really can affect volunteers. So obviously you're volunteers for the board, but there's also other volunteering activities, and again, we'll discuss this in later slides. As volunteers, you have to be very careful about your role when it deals with students, with staff of the district, and whether or not you have authority over them, whether you're directing them, because even though you're volunteering and you're not necessarily acting in the function of a school board member, you're still a school board member. So that would potentially be considering administering a school. For this advisory opinion, A1015 is a perfect example of that. A board member volunteered for a school play and had supervisory authority over a student and personnel. That would violate the code. In C4010, the board member overruled the superintendent and let a student, a senior student, come to graduation, despite the fact the superintendent had known that there were safety concerns with the student and barred them from coming from graduation. Yeah, that's a big no-no there. I'm going to skip through that. I will, and again, if you have any questions regarding any of these cases, feel free to ask. Subsection A, I will recognize that authority rests with the Board of Education and will make no personal promises nor take any private action that may compromise the board. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Just some examples of that are board member violated the code when they made personal promises to a candidate for assistant superintendent by advancing the possibilities of employment with the district and promising to resolve a contract issue for the district, which had the potential to compromise the board. This board member was actually reprimanded, but they resigned first, which is why they got only a reprimand. And they apologized and knew they did wrong there. Moving on, C3418. The board member violated the act when during a traffic stop, she identified herself as a board member, called the request for her license. The officer asked for her license. She used some expletives, threatened to make a call right now to the council president, and then proceeded to call the police chief a skinhead cop chief. And the township administrator contacted the BOE president, and she got a 6-month suspension. Obviously, the SEC did not. They really frowned upon that. She's lucky she wasn't removed for this. But you don't always know what the SEC is going to do. Under F, subsection F, I will refuse to surrender my independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups or to use school for personal gain or the gain of friends. I mean, that's with any governmental position. You obviously can't use it for your own personal benefit or your friend's benefit. That's where the conflicts come into play. It's just that air of you could be giving someone a benefit. that the SEC frowns upon. So that's why they say certain conflicts. For example, if you have a spouse who's a teacher in the school district, well then anybody who's in that supervisory chain, you're not going to be able to vote on their contracts, anything related to them. So that's just an example of, while your intentions may be good, the SEC doesn't allow it, or the accountability regs. In terms of, there's a couple of advisory opinions that address this. A board member employed by a company that sells vocabulary books to the district would not violate the code by participating in board actions relating to the superintendent or any other administrative positions, as he was salaried employee with no interest in the company and was not responsible for sales. I got to be honest, that one is a little surprising, because I would advise you not to probably have to vote on that. But it turned on the fact that the person was salaried. In terms of elections, board members can endorse candidates for elections, but you must do it as private citizens. You got to be very careful about that. You don't lose your First Amendment rights, but you have to be clear that you're not doing it as a board member. So if you're making robocalls or something like that, you can't say, I'm doing this as a board member. You should say, I'm calling as a private citizen. If you create your own signs or pamphlets, you have to say, I'm endorsing this person as a private citizen, not a board member. All right. Slip over that. This is another critical one. Maintaining confidentiality under G. I will hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools, which, if disclosed, would needlessly injure individuals or the schools. In all other matters, I will provide accurate information and, in concert with my fellow board members, interpret to the staff the aspirations of the community for its schools. You're going to receive confidential information as a board member. Typically in executive session, you need to keep that information confidential. Anything that you disclose, even other people know it, you can't discuss it. You are entrusted with information that, well, again, while it may get out to the public through other sources, it can't come from you. So when people ask you if you know about something that you may have information on, you can't confirm or deny that. Say, I can't discuss that as a board member. I can't discuss students, staff, things of that nature. Any confidential information you receive. I'm going to just, H. I will vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the Chief Administrative Officer. That's like we said before. Superintendent recommends. Now, you did the question, if the superintendent recommends, do I have to accept that recommendation? The answer is no, you don't have to, but you really should, because it really got to be arbitrary or capricious, the recommendation. You really have to have information that shows that the recommendation is not based on the person being the best qualified candidate, that it's arbitrary or capricious. Otherwise, you're probably violating the act. If you have questions regarding that, you can always ask, but that's where the administration is administering the school district. They're doing the interviews. They're vetting through the candidates. They're vetting the candidates. You're going to then trust their judgment that they're hiring the right people. If you have information otherwise, okay, but you're not to go and interview people yourself, for example. I will support and protect school personnel in proper performance of their duties. C01-18, a board member violated the code during a private conversation during a board meeting. He asked if the CSA position opened, would that person be interested, who was a current employee. There was no available position. He's now, one, administering the schools, involving himself in day-to-day activities. By talking to employees, he's also bypassing the superintendent, and he's also undermining the superintendent, which is where I comes in, by talking about replacing that person to another employee. So that's why C0118 is an example of not failing to support district personnel. Yeah, this one you hear about a lot, C2511. The president of the board violated the code by posting comments on Facebook and a link to a picture of the superintendent. This is a quote. Now, if we can only do something about our local terrorists that destroy dreams and burn futures. That is not supporting the superintendent. He is not keeping the faith there. Under J, I will refer all complaints to the chief administrative officer and will act on the complaints at public meetings only after failure of an administrative solution. It's another big one that you will deal with a lot. You will have as board members, parents, maybe staff, just citizens in general come up to you and ask you questions, complain about a principal, for example. You can't go to that principal and discuss it with that principal. Your obligation now as a board member is to go directly to the superintendent, tell the superintendent about the parent's complaint, or staff, whoever it is, and then let the superintendent and administration deal with it. If it's not dealt with, then your obligation is to deal with it at a public meeting after there's a failure of an administrative solution. That typically is not the case. I mean, it's usually resolved, but your obligation is to go to the superintendent. You cannot bypass and then go to other staff. I mean, C2505 is just that example. C2407 is an example. The board member violated the code by not providing superintendent with letters because he did not like the superintendent's management of issues raised in the letters. Instead, the board member went to other administrators to address these issues. So, I mean, this one's pretty clear. All right, conflicts. We will, especially for the new board members, discuss potential conflicts with you. But this is a little handy chart you can use in terms of conflicts. There's the nepotism rules, and then there's the Ethics Act. I actually had a conversation with the School Ethics Commission today about this. This lays out, so for example, immediate family members, and I'm going to actually skip to the next one, because a lot of this applies to contract negotiations with the association and your ability to vote or not vote or be involved in negotiations or that process. If you have I'm going to jump back real quick, immediate family member within the school district or a relative within the school district as defined under the act, you're not going to be able to be involved. If you have someone, if they're outside of the school district and also they're represented by the same labor organization, so the labor organization that represents the most units in the state is the NJEA, New Jersey Education Association. They're not the only. Teamsters or CWA can represent as well. But if they're in that local or statewide organization and they're in another district and you have a relative in that district, it's going to be a fact-sensitive inquiry depending on what their role is and what their relationship is to you, but you may not be able to be involved. It also may depend on their role in the association. By the way, by doing that, I just skipped like 3 slides. You're welcome. All right. So just a couple advisory opinions. Staffing companies. The SEC advised that an employment of a board member's sister by a substitute staffing company that had a contract with the board for substitutes would not conflict the board member from negotiations or from participation in all issues concerning district superintendent or building principal or budget votes. Substitutes, and another advisory opinion, advised that where a board member's spouse is employed as a substitute teacher in district, the board member may not participate in any personnel matter of those in the chain of command over a board member's spouse. So this is just quickly, like I said before, if it's a non-traditional unit, one not represented by the NJAA or the AFT, then you would look at that particular unit. So, I mean, we don't deal with that a lot, and I don't know that you won't deal with that here, really. Doctrine of necessity, I mean, if this comes up, we'll address it with you. This is a situation where if there are enough conflicts that you don't have enough board members who can vote on a particular item, we may have to invoke the doctrine of necessity. That's really for us to deal with. And we'll explain that when it happens. Keep the faith. We'll explain that. Okay, so just jumping back in terms of interviews, because it does come up sometimes. Boards of education, you can decide if you want a personnel committee, but the SEC does not support board members conducting interviews for positions below superintendent. Superintendent's going to be different in terms of evaluation, in terms of search for superintendent, hiring of superintendents. Anything under that, you're relying on the superintendent. All right. If a board does form a personnel committee, the SEC doesn't like to see more than 1 or 2 board members on it, and your role is limited. Because again, you got to be careful about being involved in the day-to-day operations. I'm going to tell you right now, if anyone asks me if you should be on a interview panel, I'm going to tell you it's a really bad idea, because all you can do is sit there and not say a word. And if you say anything, and it's still going to be based on the recommendation of the superintendent anyway. There's nothing good that can come out of it. All right, volunteering. I'm sure you're volunteering here. So I'm sure you volunteer in other places. If you have questions about volunteering, this is really fact sensitive. I would say ask us. You have to be, anytime you have authority over students or staff, or potential authority over students or staff, ask us about it, and if need be, we can get an advisory opinion. But it says here in the advisory opinions, the SEC is concerned with the extent to which volunteering board member have authority to give and receive directions to and from staff during volunteering activity. They don't want to, they're not saying you can't volunteer, but be careful when you do and it involves student or staff. I'm going to see if I could, you can read all this. All right, C-2516. This is an interesting one. And it has to do with, so the board makes decisions. Individual board members do not. You need authority from the board before you can really do anything. So in this situation, a lone board member had procedural concerns about the superintendent contract. The board member wanted to file a petition with the commissioner for determination on those issues. Board attorney said, don't do it, because the majority of the board did not support you in doing this. He filed anyway, and after the board, after he filed, the ethics charge was filed against that board member. The SEC found that the board member instituted proceeding adverse to the district and took personal action that compromised the board. This can actually be disqualifying. You're now taking an adverse action, it's an adverse litigation against the board or a member of the board, which, separate from the SEC, can be a filing of a petition with the commissioner to be disqualified. So it really comes down to individual action. If the board does not authorize it, you can't do it. Let's see what we got here. Oprah, we have some slides here on Oprah. You can read it. This is more for us to deal with in terms of Oprah requests. It's the Open Public Records Act. It is the act which allows any citizen of the state to make a request for documents that would be public record. There are exceptions to it. It's all about transparency. There are certain exceptions to public records. So we don't have, for example, personnel documents. Certain information, date of hire, salary, are public records. But individual, like obviously social security numbers, date of birth, we have that information. That's protected. We don't turn that information over. But that's really, if you have questions about that, you can certainly ask. but it's something we typically deal with. You don't want to hear about Oprah. So that's it. I got you through it. And I never want to say goodbye, but I have to. Thank you very much.
Jeff, I'm going to ask you to stay at the mic for just one more minute because I want to see if any board members have any questions for you.
Hi, Jeff. So thank you. That was really helpful, as always. I wanted to ask a question about the volunteering piece, especially when it comes to involvement in PTA events. So I know you'd mentioned that we can't be in positions of supervision of staff and students, but what about supervision of parents? Is that, because a lot of times PTA events, you might have positions where you're supervising the parents. Is that
No, that's,
also an issue?
unless there's an unusual circumstance, that should not be an issue. It's really when you're dealing with directing staff and directing students. Unless there's a situation where it somehow influenced either of those, I wouldn't be concerned.
Hi. I believe that we are not allowed as board members to do things like when we're around other students or parents to sort of declare an immediate open forum on how are things going in the schools. I'm on the school board. What do you, tell me what you think. I believe we are not allowed to do that. Is that correct?
I mean, parents can come and make complaints or talk to you. It's when you start soliciting, and now you start to now creep into administration and administering by saying, okay, how's this teacher teaching? That's going to be fact sensitive about, and it's going to be what you actually say. So I would be very concerned if you were to do that. If you were to hold an open forum, it is going to be a fact sensitive issue, but if you start soliciting information on students or staff, I would tell you that's going closer to the day-to-day operations. So I would avoid doing that. It's different than parents coming up to you and complaining. Then you just say, oh, I'm a board member, I'll bring it to the superintendent. And really, you shouldn't be discussing it with them, even if you do have that open forum. It's more, what are your complaints? I'll pass them along.
Going back to PTA volunteering, what about when handling money for events?
Well, it depends on, so is your question,
Like at the table where they're, say, selling T-shirts or buying tickets for the event? Like, can you
are you
pass it
taking money
along
from
to the
staff and students potentially?
from the parents to, say, the treasurer, and just kind of passing it along?
As long as it's not dealing with the students and the staff.
Okay.
I think that's really a separate organization. I say separate, I know there's ties, but yeah, as long as you're not directing anyone and telling them what to do. If, for example, a staff member was collecting the money and you were directing the staff member, that would be different,
Okay.
okay?
Sorry, just one quick question. The personal example is like we have a lacrosse day, and then we tell students, because we have volunteers, like I need you to work concessions, I need you to go out on the field and do this. Am I not allowed to do that anymore?
That one I would be careful with. I would say probably not.
It's like my husband's dream. I got dropped on my volunteering.
We can talk about that one later, but I would say you probably want to avoid that.
Okay. All right.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
At this time, if you'll sign this piece of paper for me, I'm going to pass it down. I need to have this in the file for the QSAC review. Thanks.
That brings us to our first opportunity for public comment. The board invites thoughts and reactions on agenda items and items of concern from members of the community who are present. Each participant is asked to give his or her name and address prior to making a statement, which will be limited to 3 minutes. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer. All right, seeing as there's no public comment, we will move on. No committees met since our last meeting, so we have no committee reports. So we'll move now to the voting portion of our agenda. I'm going to start with our administration items. We have a couple of things. I need to add in, if I ask you all to please, on administration item 2, could you please add in the following 2 case numbers? HSN 092019 and HSN 10, I'm sorry, I'll do it again. HSN 102019. So could I please get a motion on the administration items 1 to 6 with the change to number 2 plus the purple addendum? Tony and Martin, are there any questions or comments?
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Flores.
Yes.
Ms. Ho.
Yes.
Ms. Krug.
Yes.
Ms. McCune.
Yes.
Mr. Whitfield. Yes. Ms. Zovich.
Yes.
Mr. Cheng. Yes. Ms. Juliana.
Yes.
Ms. Case.
Yes. We don't have any curriculum items tonight, so could I please get a motion on the finance items 1 through 11 plus the blue addendum? Louisa and Rachel, are there any questions or comments on the finance items?
Okay, we'll start with Ms. Ho.
Yes.
Ms. Krug.
Yes.
Ms. McCune.
Yes.
Mr. Whitfield. Yes. Ms. Zovich.
Yes.
Mr. Cheng. Yes. Mr. Flores.
Yes.
Ms. Juliana.
Yes.
Ms. Case.
Yes. And please get a motion on the personnel items 1 to 3 plus our green addendum. Graylin and Robin. Are there any questions?
Okay, we'll start with Ms. Krug.
Yes.
Ms. McCune.
Yes.
Mr. Whitfield. Yes. Ms. Zovich.
Yes.
Mr. Cheng. Yes. Mr. Flores.
Yes.
Ms. Ho.
Yes.
Ms. Juliana.
Yes.
Ms. Case.
Yes. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge some retirements. Deborah Kavanaugh, High School North teacher of life skills, is retiring after 19 years with the district. And Sven Stranad, a science teacher at Community Middle School, is retiring after 18 years with the district. I'd like to wish them both all the best as they move on into their retirement and thank them for their commitment to our students. Do we have any liaison reports? Any new business? That brings us to the second opportunity for public comment. 15 minutes will be provided at the end of our meeting for public comment. Each participant is asked to give his or her name and address prior to making a statement, which will be limited to 3 minutes. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer. Okay, no comments tonight. We're going to need to go into a closed session now, so I have to read this statement. Whereas the Open Public Meetings Act authorizes boards of education to meet in executive session under certain circumstances, and whereas the Open Public Meetings Act requires the board to adopt a resolution at a public meeting to go into private session, now therefore be it resolved by the West Windsor-Plainsboro Regional School District Board of Education that it is necessary to meet in executive session to discuss certain items involving personnel matters and HIB matters. Be it further resolved that any discussion held by the board, which need not remain confidential, will be made public as soon as feasible. The minutes of the executive session will not be disclosed until the need for confidentiality no longer exists. Be it further resolved that the board will return to open session to conduct business at the conclusion of the executive session if necessary, but we will not be returning to open session. Can I get a motion to go into executive session? Rachel and Louisa. All those in favor? Aye? Okay. Thank you. Happy New Year. Thanks for coming out. And we'll start up in a couple minutes.